For nearly 2 decades, professional wrestling had no competition worth mentioning. WWE stood alone at the top, WCW was a memory, ECW was a history lesson. And TNA, despite the talent, despite the ambition, never became the threat it needed to be. Vince McMahon had built an empire. And empires, when unchallenged long enough, stop worrying about war. But somewhere in the background, quiet at first, then louder, something was changing. A billionaire's son. A group of wrestlers the internet had fallen in love with. And fans who were hungry, genuinely hungry for something different. What happened next shocked the entire industry. To understand why AEW's rise was so significant, you first have to understand just how dominant WWE was in 2019. We're talking billion-dollar television deals with Fox and USA Network, global touring, merchandise, a streaming service, Saudi Arabia partnerships worth hundreds of millions. WWE had become less of a wrestling company and more of a global entertainment machine. And Vince McMahon, the architect of all of it, had seen competitors come and go. He'd outlasted Ted Turner's money. He'd outlasted ECW's chaos. He'd outlasted 100 promotions that thought they had what it took to challenge him. So when Tony Khan, son of Fulham FC owner and Jacksonville Jaguars co-owner Shahid Khan, announced he was starting a wrestling company, the reaction inside WWE was reportedly one thing and one thing only. But here's what WWE missed. What every empire eventually misses when it's been comfortable too long. The fans were exhausted. That exhaustion was a crack in the foundation, and AEW was about to drive a wedge right through it. Not exhausted of wrestling, exhausted of the version of wrestling they were being given, exhausted of scripted promos that sounded like they were written by a corporate committee. Exhausted of stars who'd build momentum for months only to lose it in a single night based on a producer's whim. Exhausted of a product that seemed to treat the audience's intelligence as an afterthought. Before AEW was even a company, the seeds had already been planted. Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks Matt and Nick Jackson, Cody Rhodes. These weren't just wrestlers. They were something the industry hadn't seen in the modern era. Independent stars with genuine mainstream crossover appeal. Wrestlers who had cultivated massive fan bases entirely outside of WWE's ecosystem. They were selling out their own merchandise, headlining shows in Japan, building audiences through social media, YouTube, and podcasts in ways that the traditional wrestling machine had never quite figured out. And then came the moment that made the entire industry sit up and take notice. All In, the 1st of September 2018, Sears Center, outside Chicago. A non-WWE wrestling event organized by Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks, selling over 10,000 tickets. It had been an unspoken rule in the wrestling business. Only WWE could move numbers like that in America. Only WWE had the brand recognition, the television exposure, the infrastructure to fill arenas. All In proved that assumption wrong, and everybody in the industry felt it. Wrestling fans didn't just want an alternative. They were willing to show up and pay for one. All Elite Wrestling launched officially in January 2019. And when they announced a television deal with TNT, the same network that had once aired WCW Monday Nitro, the symbolism was not lost on anyone. AEW Dynamite debuted on the 2nd of October 2019. And WWE's response told you everything you needed to know about how seriously they'd started taking this. Within weeks, WWE moved NXT, their developmental brand, to Wednesday nights, the same night as Dynamite. Officially, WWE called it a coincidence, a scheduling decision, purely business. Nobody believed that for a second. The Wednesday Night Wars had begun. Every week, the two companies competed head-to-head for the same audience. It was the first time since the Monday Night Wars of the late 90s that wrestling fans had a genuine choice to make on any given evening, and something important started happening. Something that went beyond Raw ratings numbers. Momentum shifted, not all at once, not dramatically, but wrestling fans, particularly the hardcore, dedicated, passionate fans who drove the conversation online, started buzzing about AEW in a way they hadn't buzzed about anything in years. Social media lit up after Dynamite. YouTube reaction videos multiplied. Podcasters spent hours breaking down AEW storylines with the kind of enthusiasm that used to be reserved exclusively for WWE's biggest moments. Wrestling was exciting again. For a lot of people, that was the most dangerous thing AEW could have possibly done. If you want to identify the single moment where AEW stopped being an upstart and became a genuine cultural force, a moment that made every wrestling executive in the world take notice, it was the night of the 20th of August, 2021, Chicago, AEW Rampage, an episode being promoted under one title, The First Dance. For 7 years, CM Punk, arguably the most compelling promo in modern wrestling history, a man who had walked away from WWE at the height of his popularity, had been absent from professional wrestling entirely. Fans had begged for his return for years. WWE had teased it, talked around it, the internet had speculated endlessly. Nobody truly believed it would happen. And nobody, absolutely nobody, expected it to happen in AEW. But the night before it happened, the rumors had reached a fever pitch. By the time the doors opened at the United Center, CM Punk's home city, a building that knew his name, the crowd was already electric. Already chanting, already believing, and then Cult of Personality hit. The building didn't just react. It erupted. Years of absence, years of anticipation, years of wondering if this would ever happen, all of it released in a single, seismic moment. CM Punk walked out onto an AEW stage, looked out at thousands of screaming fans, and delivered a promo that made the hair stand up on the arms of every wrestling fan watching around the world. He talked about why he left. He talked about what brought him back. And then he said something that cut through every layer of kayfabe and storyline and worked the entire room like a knife. He said he was home. That moment wasn't just a wrestling angle, it was a statement. One of WWE's most beloved modern stars, a man who had built his legacy on WWE's stages, had chosen AEW. Voluntarily, enthusiastically, publicly. AEW wasn't just surviving anymore. It was winning. 2 weeks later, AEW held All Out. And if CM Punk's arrival was the statement All Out 2021 was the proof of concept, CM Punk wrestled his first match in 7 years. The crowd was nuclear from the opening bell. But the night wasn't done. Adam Cole, one of the most respected performers of his generation, a man who had spent years as the cornerstone of WWE's NXT brand, debuted. And then, moments later, Bryan Danielson, a man many consider the greatest in-ring performer alive. A man who had headlined WrestleMania. A man who had retired emotional crowds with one of the most beloved characters in wrestling history. Bryan Danielson in an AEW ring. Wrestling Twitter went into meltdown. YouTube reaction videos broke view counts. News coverage that rarely touched professional wrestling was suddenly paying attention, and for the first time in a very long time, WWE didn't feel untouchable. Because here's the thing about AEW signing major stars like Punk, Danielson, and Cole. It wasn't just about adding talent to a roster. It was about shifting a narrative that WWE had owned for years. For a long time, if a wrestler left WWE, the assumption was that they had failed, that they couldn't cut it at the highest level, that the independent circuit or smaller promotions were a step down. AEW dismantled that story completely. Jon Moxley, formerly Dean Ambrose in WWE, a man who had seemed frustrated and creatively stifled for years, became one of the most electrifying performers in the world the moment he arrived in AEW. He didn't look like someone who had failed. He looked reborn. And fans noticed, and they started asking dangerous questions. Why do wrestlers seem happier outside of WWE? That question, simple, uncomfortable, devastating, was the most effective weapon AEW ever had. Not ratings. Not pay-per-view buy rates. That question. Meanwhile, WWE was making decisions that seemed almost designed to accelerate AEW's momentum. In a period of aggressive cost-cutting, WWE released a wave of talent that stunned the wrestling world. Bray Wyatt, one of the most creative and beloved characters in years. Aleister Black, now Malachi Black, a performer with an aesthetic and intensity that fans loved. Keith Lee, a generational athlete whose potential felt limitless. These weren't releases in a vacuum. These were releases that felt, to the audience, like gifts to AEW. And in several cases, that's exactly what they became. But here's the part of the story that often gets overlooked. WWE started changing quietly, gradually, but unmistakably. You could see it in the presentation. You could feel it in the storytelling. Longer-term booking, more attention to wrestler momentum, a willingness to let performers speak more naturally instead of reading from a script. Was it coincidence? Was it evolution? Or was it competition doing what competition always does, forcing improvement? And then, in the summer of 2022, everything changed again. Vince McMahon stepped down from WWE amid personal controversy. And Paul Levesque Triple H stepped into the role of Chief Content Officer, taking over creative control of the entire company. What followed was, by almost universal agreement among fans, a dramatic and immediate improvement. Storylines began making sense across weeks and months. Stars who had been misused or buried were given new opportunities. The product felt, for the first time in years, like it was being made by people who genuinely understood why professional wrestling mattered to its audience. Triple H brought back Bray Wyatt. He invested in new stars. He listened. And while it would be an oversimplification to say AEW caused all of this, internal WWE factors played enormous roles, it would be equally dishonest to pretend that AEW's rise didn't create a climate in which change felt necessary. Competition creates pressure. Pressure creates urgency, and urgency sometimes creates improvement. That's one of AEW's most lasting legacies. Not the matches, though there were many great ones. Not the ratings, though they were often impressive. But the fact that their existence forced the wrestling industry to raise its standards. Let's be honest about what AEW did and didn't accomplish. AEW did not destroy WWE. WWE remains the largest wrestling company in the world by virtually every measurable metric. Their television deals, their premium live events, their global brand, none of it was toppled. But that was never really the point. The point was whether it was possible, whether the wrestling industry, after 20 years of monoculture, could support real competition, whether fans who had only ever had one major option would actually show up for a second one. AEW answered all of those questions with a definitive yes. They proved that wrestlers don't need WWE to become stars. A generation of performers, Jon Moxley, MJF, Jungle Boy, Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, built genuine fan bases and recognizable names entirely within AEW's ecosystem. They proved that wrestling fans will travel, will pay, will invest emotionally in a product that respects their intelligence, and they proved something that might matter most in the long run. They proved that WWE could bleed. Not catastrophically, not terminally, but bleed. That psychological shift, the idea that WWE was no longer the only game in town, that the narrative could be challenged, that stars could choose a different path and thrive, changed professional wrestling forever. And there is no putting that back in the bottle. Today, the war between WWE and AEW continues. The landscape has shifted again. New television deals, new partnerships, new faces on both sides. Sometimes WWE dominates so completely it feels like the mid-2000s all over again. Sometimes AEW shocks everyone with a signing or a moment that makes the whole world pay attention. But regardless of who wins on any given night, regardless of ratings, buy rates, or social media trending topics, one thing remains permanently, irreversibly true. Somewhere in a WWE boardroom, the realization settled in quietly, uncomfortably, and irrevocably. This was not a startup. This was not a phase. This was not another failed attempt at competition. This was dangerous. and professional wrestling would never be quite the same again. If this story hits you the way wrestling at its best always does, like it matters, like it's real, like the stakes are somehow both fake and completely genuine at the same time, subscribe to the channel. Because in professional wrestling, the real stories, the ones happening in boardrooms and backstage hallways and contract negotiations, are almost always more dramatic than anything happening inside the ring. We'll see you for the next one.